Alright, so once again, we're going to review what we learned right before we went to spring break. So we're going to review Lincoln's speeches. So starting with his first inaugural address. His first inaugural address is going to be in 1861, right when he is president. He gives a speech to the nation, and his main goal was to preserve the Union at all costs. He did not want to go to war. He just wanted to make sure they stayed the same or be united as one country. But once again, the South had other ideas and they wanted to secede from the Union. So once again, he did not want to end slavery. All he wanted to do was just preserve and keep the Union the same and united. Moving on, towards the middle of the war, Lincoln is going to give his Gettysburg Address when he is invited because 50,000 men died from both North and South. He's going to be invited to give this speech in 1863. As you guys remember, the Battle of Gettysburg is going to be the turning point of the Civil War because the South is going to lose so many soldiers and they're never going to be able to recuperate after this. So just to refresh our memory about the Gettysburg Address, we are fighting for freedom. Don't give up now, or the soldiers would have died for nothing or would have died in vain. So once again, he is now changing his mindset. He doesn't care much about preserving because he knows he's going to do that because the war is coming to an end. Because it's a turning point of the Civil War. Now his main goal is to liberate and free the slaves in the South. So that's going to motivate the soldiers more than ever to continue fighting during the Civil War. Moving on, at the end of the war, towards the end, it's almost about to finish, Lincoln's going to give his second inaugural address in 1865 because he's going to be elected for a second term. So the second inaugural address, after the war ends, we should forgive the South and let's look forward to rebuilding this country. So forgive and forget and let's look forward to rebuilding because once again the South is devastated economically, socially. They have no more crops, so they have to invest in the South again to rebuild that. And like he said, we are brothers and sisters. We need to be one country, one family. So it's going to be very difficult for the North to forgive and forget because many of the Northerners lost lots of husbands, fathers, brothers, cousins, uncles. So it's going to be very hard for them to forget what the South did to them. But like he said, we are a family. We need to learn to forgive and forget and move on quickly. All right, moving on. So today we're going to learn about the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. That is going to be the last event where Mr. Robert E. Lee is going to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. So we're going to go ahead and summarize that today. So once again, whenever you think about what was the last event that ended the Civil War, it's going to be the surrender of Appomattox Courthouse. So it sounds weird, but it's a little town actually. That's one thing that people don't understand. They think it's like a courthouse where judges are. That's just the name of the town that's in Virginia. So once again, Appomattox Courthouse is a town in Virginia, like a couple of miles west of Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of the Confederacy. All right, here we go. Moving on. So what do you think is happening in this picture? Who do you think the two men sitting at the table are? So as you can see, on the left side, you have Robert E. Lee with his gray uniform. And on the right side, you have Mr. Ulysses S. Grant, which is the Union general with all his other generals besides him, or next to him, sorry. But what I want you guys to notice is how Ulysses S. Grant's generals are looking at Robert E. Lee. They're looking at him very angry. They hate Robert E. Lee for so many reasons. For him starting the war, prolonging the war. It's because of Robert E. Lee that the war was 4 years instead of being 1 month or a year, because he was such a brilliant general. So many men are furious towards Mr. Robert E. Lee. And Ulysses S. Grant is going to tell his men, I don't care what you do. I don't want anybody saying, well, you can give the looks all you want, but I don't want you to say a rude comment to Robert E. Lee. I don't want you to insult him because at the end of the day, Mr. Lincoln wants this war to be over with. So we need to be able to forgive and forget, just like Lincoln said. So many of them are so mad. They want to say 1,000 things to Robert E. Lee. They probably want to hit him, slap him. But, they have special orders from Ulysses S. Grant to not do that. So once again, it's very hard for them, but they are trying to be disciplined enough not to do something to Robert E. Lee. First vocabulary word we have here is going to be surrender. Surrender means to give up. And then reconstruction. This is what we're going to be learning about tomorrow. All right, so actually on Thursday. So Reconstruction era is going to be what happens after the Civil War. It makes sense. Reconstruct. You want to rebuild the South because the South is devastated after the Civil War. All right, moving on. I'm going to show you, go ahead and show you a timeline of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. So by 1865, the South has run out of men and supplies. And if you guys remember before we went on spring break, the reason why they're running out of supplies is because General Sherman, the Union general, was told by Ulysses S. Grant to go and march all through the South and destroy anything that could help the Confederate Army. Crops, cattle, horses, food, anything that can help. Take whatever you can, and then whatever you cannot take, you are going to destroy it and have total war. So that's why the South has run out of all supplies, because Mr. Sherman has destroyed everything in the South. So men are starving to death in the Confederacy. They have no more clothing. So once again, that's what's happening during this time frame. By April 3rd, 1865, North takes over the Confederacy capital of Richmond. As you know about the Anaconda Plan, the main goal of the Anaconda Plan was to take over Richmond, which is a Confederacy's capital. And Mr. Ulysses S. Grant and the Union Army has already took over it. So Mr. Robert E. Lee is retreating to the west, and that's why he's going to settle in the little town known as Appomattox Courthouse. Now, as you can see, General Lee realizes his forces were surrounded by Union troops. When Lee announced he was going to surrender to Grant, he said, "There is nothing left for me to do but to go and see General Grant. I would rather die 1,000 deaths." So he doesn't really want to surrender, but he knows he has no other choice because the South has run out of men. They run out of resources, food, water, clothing. So once again, he's put in a position that he has no other choice but to surrender. Now, Ulysses S. Grant, on the other hand, it says right here, after hours of negotiating, Grant agrees to meet with Lee, and Lee sends an officer to find a house for two generals to meet. Now, going on to this next slide. So this is going to be the house that these two generals meet, and in the little town of Appomattox Courthouse. And it says right here, Lee surrenders and the war ends. I'm going to give you a little fun fact about this. So the owner of this house used to live by a bull run, which is where the real first real battle started between the Confederacy and the Union. And he was devastated after he saw all the men dying. He said, "What the heck with this? I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to move to the west." So he sold his house in Bull Run. He goes to Appomattox Courthouse town. He buys this house, as you can see right here. And then the war ends in his house. Like, what are the coincidences of that? You move away from the battles and the war, and then the war ends where you try to get away from it. So that's the fun fact about this house right here. So anyways, I mean, yeah. So I remember my history teacher told me this in college, and I thought it was pretty ironic. What are the coincidences of that happening? But I thought you guys should know. All right, moving on. Last thing, so on April 9th, so once again, April 9th is going to be the day in 1865. So 1865, the war is going to come to an end. General Lee surrenders to General Grant at the town of Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Terms of surrender are generous to the South because Lincoln and Grant want to rebuild the country quickly. Now, what I need you guys to understand about this is this, all right? When you think about the surrender, it is not a battle. It was more of just, you know what, we're just going to come to we're just going to surrender. That's what the South says. So it wasn't really a battle. When you think about the Appomattox Courthouse, it's not really a battle. It's more of an event because the Confederates were surrounded. They had no other choice but to surrender. So nobody fought that day. Nobody died that day. Just Mr. Robert E. Lee just surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. So one more time, you can see this photo. I know it's not the best photo, but you have the two men sitting down with each other, speaking to each other about, certain terms. The story goes that Mr. Robert E. Lee told Ulysses S. Grant, the first thing I need water, I need food for my men, I need clothing for them because they are starving, and they are super dehydrated. So Ulysses S. Grant tells one of his officers to go get food, water, and clothing for the Confederate soldiers. As you can already know, the generals don't really want to help, but they have no other choice because they want the war to come to an end. So, moving on. So the surrender terms, as you can see, Mr. Robert E. Lee is writing his surrender terms. So Confederate officers could keep small guns. They couldn't take rifles, but they could take small guns back to their farm or to their homes. Confederate officers and soldiers could keep their horses, or if they did not have horses, the Union would give them a horse, because these men have to go back to their farms and their homes to obviously they have to go back to their homes to plow their farmland. So once again, that's why they gave them a horse. Moving on, the Confederate Army was allowed to return to their homes without any trouble. So nobody was trying to fight them once the war was over. Like, they just went back to their home. Moving on, Grant gave food to the Confederate Army because, like I said, they were starving to death. Now, this is a question that came out a couple of years ago on the Star. It has a little map, you know, when they're retreating, the South is retreating from Richmond, and then they finally surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. So, like I said, Robert E. Lee had no other choice but to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. And the correct answer here should be General Lee surrenders to General Grant. Now, it was not really a battle, it was more of an event. Moving on, as you can see here, you have Mr. Lincoln on the left side when he's first president of the United States. On the right side, you can see how in 4 years he is devastated, depressed, and how the war took a toll on him. Like I said, he was very stressed out, when the war began and when it ended. Moving on, so the impact fighting ends between the North and the South. Slavery is going to end. I want to see how many of y'all can do a drum roll. So slavery is going to end with which amendment again? The 13th Amendment, as you guys can know. Remember, 13th Amendment means that you put the little 13 sideways like handcuffs being uncuffed. Moving on, the nation looks towards Reconstruction. So now they're going to rebuild the South because there is no other thing to do but to rebuild. So once again, a couple things before we debrief on our, you guys take your exit ticket online. I need you guys to remember a couple of things. Remember, go back to the beginning where it talks about the speeches of Lincoln. Also, please remember that Appomattox Courthouse was not a battle. It was more an event where the two generals met to surrender because Mr. Robert E. Lee was outnumbered. He had no more soldiers, and his men were starving to death. So remember, Appomattox Courthouse is just the last event that ended the Civil War. And that's about it. So go ahead and do your exit ticket online. Make sure you have the video open on your computer. I know if you don't have a computer, maybe you have a smartphone. Have it on your, look over the videos a couple times, refresh your memory on those key points I just said right now, and then go ahead and take your quiz online. And also make sure to do your attendance. I put a link there. If you haven't already with Ms. Rodriguez, make sure you put your attendance there to make it easier for us to see who's being logged in. Alright, moving on. Any questions, put in the chat box. I'll be available at 11 o'clock today, guys. Laters.